This is something very special. 16 cores, 7600M in this tiny little package. Atomman. Our friends at Minis Forum, but the Atomman brand. This actually is going to replace an X299 system, an 18-core X299 system. This little thing is going to run circles around it, but more on that in a second. Let's unbox. Alright, so this is the system you get in the box. The HX200G, tentatively named. I'm getting one of the really early ones, but this thing is just a big old brick. It's a circuit board in the bottom and a heatsink in the top. Nothing but heatsink on the top here. Got kind of like a generic Spider Hero theme going. Got a 4-pin power brick input on the bottom, power button on the top. Looks like we've got super speed USB-C, super speed USB Type A. Got a button for the fans, combo headphone microphone. On the rear, we've got DisplayPort HDMI and Type-C, which is also DisplayPort 3 Type A, 2.5 gig LAN, headphone, and microphone. Cool. Oh, cool. You can add your own logos. That's pretty neat. So these will light up. But this is also how you get to the delicious innards. Look at my fancy magnetic stand. Warning, the first boot will take a little while. Yeah, just DDR5 memory training things. So in the box, we've also got our power brick and an HDMI cable. Now my configuration here is 7945HX with an RX 7600M XT discrete graphics card, 32 gigs of memory, and 1 terabyte of storage. Our power brick is a 300 watt power brick. This is a literal brick of compute. Alright, so this is what we're working with for internals. This heatsink is for your dual M.2. There's two 2280s under here. You get the 2230 for wireless. These are just RGB connections. They're nothing special. And then we've got our removable DDR5. It came equipped with Kingston DDR5. And the AIDA64 report on latency and timing is actually pretty good. This is the machine that it's meant to replace. My trusty X299 system. I mean, it should be roughly the same, right? Like it's just going to be power savings. It's not going to be a significant performance difference, right? Right? With good cooling and everything else, CPU-Z's built-in benchmark is about 14,000. And our best CPU-Z single thread score, 759, which is very, very good. I mean, it's 7950, but in this package. So, yeah. In fact, all of our numbers from AIDA64 look really good. They look like a desktop machine, which is great, because that's not always the case in some of these mini PCs. It's also worth noting that we're not running the memory in any kind of XMP or overclock profile. This is DDR5 5200, which is the maximum officially supported speed for this platform. Could you get more? Don't worry about it. Our Cinebench 24 scores are also pretty respectable. I mean, 113 single core score, that is competitive with modern desktops. Our Geekbench scores are also very respectable. 2792 for the single core, 16230 for the multi-core. I'm sure with a little tuning I could get that even better, but out of the box, these numbers are fantastic. Now, as this has a discrete GPU, the 7600M, that is the 8GB variety. Looks like I got some Samsung memory from the output of GPU-Z here. Let's try some games and see how the games perform. Duh, I almost forgot. Out of the box, you want to update the drivers. So I'm going to go get the new Adrenaline drivers because, hey, that's what we need for best game performance out of the box. Gotta update your stuff. Makes sense. Okay, cool. Sounds good. Well, game performance is delightful, right where you'd expect with a 7600M. It might be nice to have a little bit more GPU horsepower, and you know the possibilities for an external GPU on this are limited. More on USB 4 in a moment. But this thing is a powerhouse. It is an absolute powerhouse. 16 cores, Ryzen 7000 is no joke. This is a ridiculous little machine. So what about USB 4 on this platform? Well, I get Thunderbolt limited functionality when I try it. I'm pretty sure the rear port is not Thunderbolt at all. It's just USB and DisplayPort. And the front port seems like it would almost work, but I was getting pop-ups about Thunderbolt functionality being limited. So don't think this is the platform for you if you're looking for Thunderbolt 4. And that makes sense because the 7600M is about as good as you're going to get with an external GPU unless you go, Oculink or something like that. It's going to be a little bit faster. I mean, USB 4 at the end of the day is only the equivalent at best of PCIe Gen 3 by 4 lanes. It's pretty anemic in 2024. It can be good for high-speed devices, but you're just going to have to get by on 10, 20 gigabit USB. The overall performance of the built-in Kingston SSD is also middle of the road. It is technically a Gen 4 SSD, but it is just barely faster than the performance that you're going to get from Gen 3 SSDs, Gen 3 PCI by 4. So if you wanted to add a really high-end boot SSD to this system, that would benefit you. It would work well in that case. The iGPU on this, I'll also mention, is a Radeon 610M. You could use the iGPU for transcoding, or like if you're doing streaming, so you could do this as like a light streaming box so that you're playing 1080p with reasonable performance settings and then using the iGPU for media encode or something like that to send your stream. The 7600M generally for most AAA titles, 1080p, as long as you keep your texture, like 8 gigs of VRAM is enough. As long as you got that, the performance is going to be pretty good. 1080p, you can definitely count on more than 60 FPS in just about every title. You can do 1440p with the 7600M and a lot of titles, but it may have to be like medium-high type settings, and you may have to work to make sure that you stay within that 8 gig VRAM limit. But this is really good performance for such a relatively low power system. Alright, so what's the bottom line on this mini PC? 16 cores, monstrous CPU performance, basically desktop parity, single thread performance. If you're on an X299 system, 12, 14, 16, 18 cores, it is sad how much this system demolishes that older platform in a fraction of the power envelope. As we're doing our stress testing here, we barely see this thing go above 230 watts, and that's with both the CPU and the GPU fully loaded. So our 300 watt power brick has got plenty of headroom. That's as measured with a kilowatt, basically. 3D performance isn't bad. I wish the SSD performance were a little bit better. It's not terrible, but could be a little bit more premium. Putting in a 2 or a 4 terabyte high performance SSD in this platform could be a pretty good upgrade. Gen 4 though, I think Gen 4 makes more sense for this platform than Gen 5. That's a discussion for another day. Gen 4 is going to be the sweet spot of price performance. Something like, like the Solidigm Pro series, Samsung 980 or 990 Pro, those would also be a pretty good choice. High performance, real world. This is overkill really for like a developer workstation. This is good for like software development and light gaming and anything that requires more than 8 cores. 16 cores in this package is just ridiculous. You could run 96 gigabytes of memory in this because it is, again, standard notebook memory. 96 gigs DIMMs is a thing that you can get. And yeah, what about fan noise? Well, normal operation, both fans are spinning, but it's basically inaudible. That's about as loud as it ever gets. Now for the BIOS, we're dealing with the simplified Minis Forum BIOS. That's okay. We do have options for resized bar above 4G decoding, SROV support, and some other options like that. You can disable the SSD ports for the 2280 M.2. You can also disable the wireless LAN or the onboard 2.5 gigabit LAN. You can also disable the RGB LED through BIOS option. You do have some limited options for controlling the power and fan speed, the SSD fan speed, and what conditions will cause the fan to go off. I wouldn't recommend that you mess with any of these. This does also support network booting, which is important to commercial operations because you could re-image your machine from the network, boot off of the network in case of issues. If you know the MAC address, this is a common feature in businesses. They also leave the AMD PBS and CBS menu available, which is nice. That's not always the case. That lets you turn on or off SVM for virtualization. If you're going to run the Windows subsystem for Linux, use a developer workstation. You want those things to be enabled, the SVM to be enabled. You've also got options for IOMMU, and the graphics configuration. You can disable the onboard iGPU, but the default BIOS setting is to leave the iGPU enabled as well as the discrete 7600M. Again, that is kind of nice so that you can use the iGPU's decode. If you disable it, you will get slightly better CPU performance because the rest of the power budget of the CPU goes to the cores instead of the iGPU. So food for thought. You can also configure the system to run at up to 75 watts. And you can override the junction temperature max, basically the CPU temperature before it starts throttling. Again, nothing that I would recommend you change. You can disable Secure Boot if you're going to use Linux. And this being an AMD platform, generally the Linux support is pretty good. Let's take a look at that next. I'm also happy to report Linux support for this platform is quite good. I was able to boot into Linux, and I even tried Proxmox on this platform. And 16 cores, 96 gigabytes of memory. You don't really need the DGPU for that if you're going to use Proxmox, although you could pass that through. I didn't experiment with pass-through, didn't have enough time to do that for this video. But for Linux use cases, using it as an interactive desktop with Ubuntu 24.04, as well as Fedora and Nobara. Nobara is definitely worth a look. That's Glorious Eggroll's distribution. It has evolved, and it has gotten a lot of work over the years. And for gaming and Steam and out-of-the-box Steam awesomeness, it does have a lot of quality of life improvements. So, happy to report, for Linux, this does actually work pretty good. Neat. I can't believe that the Minis Forum effectively is twice as fast as this machine. Really, a little more than twice as fast when we're talking about multi-core. The single-thread performance difference really is pretty good. I mean, we are running a GTX 690, which is very long in the tooth, but it's a dual GPU solution. I actually flashed it to be EFI, UEFI, because NVIDIA only ever did a beta UEFI BIOS for the GTX 690, and some kind soul that may be watching out there sent me this to experiment on, and I have, and it has served me faithfully since the experiments, because, hey, but at this point, okay, I'm using XSPC for water cooling, and it's getting a little long in the tooth because it's been running continuously. I mean, it is hugely impressive that XSPC's water cooling solution has been running basically maintenance-free for more than 5 years, the occasional water change, but it's time I updated the system. It really is. It's X299 is... It's a classic, but it's gotta go. Few more options between that and the middle of the road performance of the SSD. Really not a deal breaker for the system. Everything else is just, I can't believe this is so much faster. I mean, X299 is not that old, and this is dramatically fast. Good Lord. So yeah, if you're interested in a 16-core high-performance mini PC, it's got 3 fans, 2 on this side, 1 on the other side. It's mostly heatsink, the design. It's like half heatsink and a circuit board, so I like that it has as much heatsink as it does. That's a good thing for longevity and everything else. It's pretty awesome. Good job, Atomman / Minis Forum. I like it. I'm Wireless Level 1. If you have any questions or you want to see me do a test workload for this, let me know. We'll discuss on the forum. Alright, I'm signing out. I'll see you there.